All right, this video is looking at the idea of the output relationship. So in this chapter, the first thing that has to be understood is this idea of production. You're looking at the level of input and its resulting level of output, and from there we'll move on to further characterize how do you look at this production process. So first thing is, like I said, we want to characterize this input-output relationship. So what we have here is a table from the book. We're looking at the input, units of labor per day, so we have 0, 1 through 8. Corresponding to each level of input is the level of output measured in jackets per day. So we would say if you have no labor, you have no jackets of output. If you're using 1 unit of labor per day, it's going to result in 1 jacket produced per day. 2 units of labor per day will produce 3 jackets, etc., all the way through 8. One thing you want to notice as you look at these, at this input-output relationship, or this total product, the idea of total product is the output, is you can see that as we're increasing our input, the output is increasing, but we do have this idea is that at the 8th unit of labor, our output actually declines. So it is possible to have output decline as you add more input. Okay? So now the thing is, with this input-output relationship, all it's really doing is showing you all the options of production. With a certain amount of input, how much will you produce? But it really doesn't say much about what we should do. It doesn't give us much direction as to what the options, more particular options might be. So, and if you think back to our work with utility, kind of a similar idea. We had the input idea corresponding to how much you consume, the output idea corresponding to your total utility generated. So what we can do with these measures is we can break them down into a little more refined ideas. We're going to be looking at the idea of the average product and the marginal product. Again, this marginal product has it corresponds in a way with the ideas of marginal utility, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So let's start looking at the idea of the average product. The definition of the average product is simply the total product divided by the level of input. So all we're doing is saying, what is our production, dividing it by the number of units of labor, and that becomes our average product. So if we're going to do the calculations, well, first of all, when we have 0 product, 0 input, we have 0 output, so we won't worry about that. We go to the next unit. We have 1 unit of labor producing 1 jacket per day, so that's total product of 1 jacket divided by amount of labor is 1, so the average product is 1. We look at the next unit. When we have 2 units of labor, we produce 3 jackets. 3 divided by 2, output divided by input, 1.5. And we could continue doing the calculations. I'll just fill them in, but you want to make sure you understand how these numbers came about. We'll just do one more. You can fill in the rest of the cells. Okay, so let's just look at a particular level. So let's look at when we're using 3 units of labor, we're producing 7 units of output. Our average product at that 3 units of labor is 2.33. Okay? So we're going to want to calculate, you're going to want to interpret that value. So we'll just put it over 1, and we'll look at what this means. So the idea of the average product, it's really a backward-looking measure. It's saying we're using a certain amount of input, it's generating a certain amount of output, and so far, it's a backward-looking measure. We could say that each unit of labor is producing 2.33 jackets. Okay? So, but the idea is not in reality that every unit of labor is producing 2.33 jackets, because we can see here that that very first unit of labor only produced 1. But the idea is this average product gives us a very convenient and succinct manner of characterizing how productive the labor has been so far. Okay? So, again, we've looked at the average product. It's a backward-looking measure telling us how productive we've been so far. If we look at the marginal product, so the definition or the equation for marginal product is the change in total product divided by the change in input. So we have to start looking at change in total product divided by the change in input. So this is going to be a little bit different from our average product. So if we look at so I'm going from 0 units of labor to 1 unit of labor, we're going to go from 0 jackets to 1 jacket. So the change in labor, 1 minus 0, divided by the change in labor, 1 minus 0, gives us 1. We move on to the next one. 3 jackets minus 1 jacket, divided by 2 units of labor minus 1 unit of labor, gives us 2. And we could just continue on with those calculations, and I'll just put in the next couple of numbers, and again, you can go ahead and fill in the rest of the cells. So again, we're going to go through and look at an interpretation of one of these values, and we'll just stick with that. When we're at 3, we want to know what the impact of adding a 4th unit of labor. So we've already calculated that. We're going to say if we're going from 3 to 4, our calculation is 2. So we'll put it 2 over 1. So what would be the interpretation of this? Well, first of all, I want you to keep in mind that unlike the average product, which is a backward-looking measure, the marginal product is a forward-looking measure. It's basically saying, what is going to happen if we add 1 more unit of labor? So here, what we can say is, if we add another unit of labor, if we add 1 more unit of labor, our output will increase by 2 units. So we add another unit of labor, 3 to 4. We're going to add 2 jackets, 7 to 9. Okay? So again, forward-looking, backward-looking. So we've got these 2 ideas. How do we use them? Well, we're going to see that a little bit later in another video. But let's look at, again, we're at a certain level of production, certain level of input, certain level of output. We can start kind of making some characterizations using the average product and the marginal product. So remember, we're at 3. So far, each unit of labor is producing 2.33 jackets. Our next unit of labor is only going to produce 2. So how can we combine that information in some sort of useful way? Well, think of it in terms of of your quiz average and your next quiz. You have a certain quiz average. If you take another quiz, if your quiz is greater than the average, you would expect to see your quiz average go up. If your next quiz is lower than your quiz average, you would expect your quiz average to go down. So we could use the same idea here. At this point, our quiz average, our average product, is 2.33 jackets per unit of labor. Our next quiz, what's going to be the impact of using 1 more unit of labor, is 2. So if we went ahead and used another unit of labor, we would expect that because the marginal product is less than the average product, because our next quiz is below our quiz average, we would expect to see our average product go down. And that's in fact what happens. We went from 2.33 to 2.25. So anyway, we've had this introduction of total product, which is just the output, average product, which is that backward-looking measure, marginal product, that forward-looking measure. You've been briefly introduced to how they're all calculated and also how we might use them to characterize what might happen next. And in a future video, we'll look at stages of production, and ultimately we'll be able to use these measures to determine, when combined with prices of input, prices of output, what is the actual choice a firm should make in terms of input in order to maximize their profit.